This episode is sponsored by DS, a team of makers, marketers, and entrepreneurs that help businesses transform their brand experience and unlock growth like never before. Are you a CMO, founder, or business leader looking to level up your brand and marketing? Head over to weareds.com and let's explore what is next for your business. That's weareds.com. Visit us to learn more.
Welcome to Forward Obsessed, where we talk to breakthrough business leaders and rising entrepreneurs about their journeys, origin stories, and aha moments.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Forward Obsessed. I'm your co-host David Salinas, and our guest today is Beverly Parenti. She's an entrepreneur and a philanthropist. She's also the daughter of Holocaust survivors, which would teach her grit, resilience, and compassion. She'd go on as an executive and co-founder of First Virtual, a company that she would take from a small company to an IPO. Afterwards, she would start KickLabs with her partner, Chris Redlitz, also a guest on Forward Obsessed, where they would give birth to startup companies like Wish.com. Afterwards, her and her partner, Chris, would start their nonprofit and philanthropic passion, The Last Mile, where they would provide tech training to folks in prison, which is now in multiple states and has gotten visibility from everybody from the Zuckerbergs to presidents and governors of major states. Her journey emphasizes purposeful work, grit, compassion, choosing the right partners, and second chances. Beverly was an awesome guest, and I hope you enjoy the show. Make sure to check us on our social channels for little clips of all the different episodes that you listen to and share with your friends and family. Thank you again for being Forward Obsessed.
Welcome back, everybody, to Forward Obsessed. I'm your co-host, Pete Senna, joined always by my co-host,
David Salinas.
And I'm super excited to have Beverly Parenti on the show today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we talk about today and all the amazing work you're doing and all the great things you're putting out in the world, let's start from the beginning. So in true Forward Obsessed fashion, we'd like to go back to the origin story. We'd like to dig in and really look at where do the seeds of entrepreneurship come from? And we just see oftentimes people's background, how they grow up makes a big difference in that. So can you take us back to a young child Beverly world and just how did the seeds of entrepreneurship find you?
How much time do I have?
As much as we need.
Okay. So I was born in New York, and I am the first generation American in my family. Both of my parents were Viennese. They met in New York as well. But each of them had their own story of how they escaped the Holocaust. And they came to the United States with virtually nothing. And when they left the world, they were highly successful because of the incredible drive they had to succeed, which they instilled in me. And especially my father, who started a number of businesses when he first came to the U.S. And he was able to pivot. If it didn't work, he did something else. He was an incredible visionary, I would say, and such a hard worker. He came here when he was in the late teens, and he, barely had a high school diploma. But even when he lived in Vienna, he worked. And his story is really interesting, and I'd like to share that with you of how he actually came to the United States. It was a difficult time, as you know, when the Nazis invaded many countries, including Austria and Vienna in particular. And my grandfather was a very learned man. He was actually a CPA. He had a great job at a publishing company in Vienna. And so when the SS came to arrest him, they brought him to the local jail at the time, and were figuring out where he was going to go next. So my father waited outside the jail to see if he could find out anything about him, or maybe they would release him and then he could take him and they could go and hide. But nothing ever happened. And in fact, the SS came to find my father in his apartment. They had a great apartment. They lived on Oberaugartenstrasse in Vienna, which I have visited since, which was just beautiful. They had a wonderful lifestyle. And so when my father heard the knock on the door, he hid in the ceiling of one of the rooms in the house. And when they came looking for him, they couldn't find him and they left. And so my father was so entrepreneurial, as I said, and he was very clever. And he purchased a Nazi youth outfit for himself, thinking ahead that maybe at one point he would have to put it on and pretend that he was someone he wasn't. So he gave his mother and sister all the money he had to help them survive and live and pay the rent in this pretty tony apartment. And he put on his outfit and he started walking, and he walked to the train and he got on the train, and no one bothered him because he was looking like he belonged. And he got to the border. Even on the train, when they asked for documents and papers, I don't know how he did it because his passport had the big J stamp on it, Uden. Anyway, he gets to the border in the Netherlands, and somehow he just walks across the border. And again, no one bothered him. Amazing. So he walks to the nearest town and he finds this youth group that he knew about from Vienna, and they also had ties in Israel at the time. And so they gave him info to go to another town, and there was a farm that needed hands. And my father said, "Oh, I can do that." Of course, he had never done it before, but that's the way he rolled. So he wound up making it to the town and meeting the farmer, and he was hired as a farmhand, and he milked cows, and he did whatever he was asked to do on the farm, and the farmer had a daughter. And so my father and the farmer's daughter became attached, and it was, a nice life, but his goal was to get to the United States, where he had a cousin or an uncle who was going to help him and put him to work. But he needed money to get to the U.S. So he had word through the farmer and his daughter about a wealthy man outside of the village in which he was working who was lending money to people who wanted to get passage to the United States. And my father went to see him, and lo and behold, he lent him the money to buy the ticket to get on the ship to come to the U.S. because he did have an opportunity when he got here through his uncle. Anyway, he came to the U.S., he landed in New York, went through Ellis Island, made the connection with his family, started working, and he was, selling, as he would say, kerchiefs and turbans. Kerchiefs and turbans and garments that his uncle had for sale in his store. And my father would go knocking door to door. He had a stand on the street. True entrepreneur, really trying to, get some money to get his own place and establish his life. And when he finally accomplished that, and he was actually able to be on his own, he wanted to contact the man in the Netherlands who gave him the money to give it back. He wanted to pay him back. And in fact, he asked him at the time that he gave him the money, "How do I ever pay you back?" And he said, "You don't have to pay me back, just be successful." And so anyway, so he's trying to find the man, somehow to get to him to pay him back. And he found out that the man had been killed by the Nazis for the kindness that he had.
Sympathizer.
Exactly. And, to this day, it pains me so much to hear that story because the kindness of this man led to his death. And as you hear more of my story, you'll understand how this has been just the catalyst for me to want to help others and give back, and also to work as hard as I possibly can to be successful enough to be able to do that.
Integrity, kindness, and hard work. Clearly 3 things that have been embedded in you since your childhood.
Exactly.
And you said he had an incredible will to be successful, but it sounds like he also had it to survive.
100%.
So driven to succeed, driven to survive, and then it brought him here, and then he started to hustle his butt off.
He did hustle his butt off. And my mother was by his side the entire time, even though she raised 3 children. He worked, ridiculous hours and, came home and always had a hot meal and a loving family waiting for him. But it was hard. It was really hard. And, we...
I'm sorry to
Go ahead.
interrupt. Was she the farmer's daughter?
No.
So he met her when he came to the States.
Exactly.
Got it.
It was interesting. She was dating a furrier, pretty good, in Manhattan, who also, was a survivor. And my father was dating my mother's best friend at the time.
Wow.
So they were actually at a triple date on New Year's Eve, and my father saw my mother and said, that's who I want to go out with. And she, okay. She had her boyfriend at the time, but they started dating, and kind of the rest is history. Yeah, he enlisted actually, and he served in the army in World War II, and he was stationed in Germany. I have a lot of stories about that, but the one in particular that hits me is that because he spoke German, and he was one of the few who did, he had some pretty intense assignments in prisoner of war camps because of his language capability and because of, his incredible strength and drive. And so a lot of those stories were quite interesting. But for him, it was one of his finest times in life because he learned so much, he was trusted, and he had power.
So you were one of 3?
Yeah.
Oldest, youngest, middle?
Youngest.
The youngest.
The youngest.
So how were his lessons of resilience and pay it forwardness, obviously wanting to pay this guy back? How did he get that to you? How did that come across in your upbringing? Was he very active in your maturation?
So I was the 3rd girl.
3 girls.
3 girls. He wasn't really excited when he heard that he was having another girl. So he actually, I was like his son in many ways. I was his buddy. I did sports. I would go with him to the driving range, and I was the one who put the ball on the tee for him so he didn't have to hurt his back when he bent over, and he can save his energy for his swing. We played Frisbee every night in the backyard. We hung together, and we played pool. A lot of times I'd be doing my homework, and I would hear "Bev" from the basement. That's my dad calling me to set him up, and we would play pool, and we had a lot of fun. We hung out a lot, and so I was his sidekick.
Mm-hmm. Would he tell you lots of stories? And
he would. He was a great storyteller. You can ask Chris about that too. And from an early age, I worked with him and my mother. He had a very successful import business where he imported sewing baskets and women's handbags and beach totes, many that I even still see today in the marketplace.
Wow.
Yeah, which is extraordinary. And so he traveled a lot. He traveled to the factories where his products were made. And he would ship products from a facility in Asia to another facility in then Yugoslavia, and they would do embroidery on the products, and then they would ship them. He sold to all the big box, big brand stores, but he traveled a lot, which was really interesting. And it was hard. It's hard for us. He could be gone for months at a time. And then when I was 8 years old, and I was in 5th grade in New York, we all went to Mexico together. Imagine an 8-year-old from New York who was multilingual because our household was multilingual, but not so much in Spanish, go to Mexico City and then Acapulco. It was, and flying.
Yeah, 8 years
that's
old.
a big trip. But it gave us a chance to see even more about my father's life and lifestyle and what he did. And, he had the suits and ties and he was all decked out. And, it was very well respected. And that really it left a mark, and seeing another society and another culture. Then I think understanding who you are in the realm of something so much larger than just being a nice, Jewish girl in New York, in Bayside, Queens, and then ultimately on Long Island. But that left a very, very deep impression upon me.
So clearly you told us the stories of how your father did a lot of work with his hands.
Yes.
Clearly he also was very smart, did a lot of work with his head, but also did a lot of work with his heart. So at what point did you folks have the conversation and decide that you were going to go on and go get a formal college education, which probably at that time was not as popular for young Jewish women in New York City, from what I know about the world?
So I was the first in my family to graduate from college. And I also came forward and told my parents that I was going to go to school away from home.
So that was your idea?
That was my idea. Wasn't that popular because I had, as I said, been working in their businesses. After he sold his import company, he actually went into the retail business and bought stores locally. And it was office supplies and stationery, and it was a very thriving business. And I had to go in every weekend to work in the store and did a number of tasks. So I think I got off track from your question.
No, just really wanted to understand how you made that decision to go on to college, which, again, seems like a more common thing these days, but back then it wasn't as common, where you came from.
So it wasn't that far out of the realm, but to be honest, when I graduated from high school, I was 16 years old.
Wow.
I skipped third grade. My birthday was early. I was late in the year, so I started a year early. I started school when I was 4. I'm 16. Wow. I'm not going to work in the stationery store for the rest of my life. What do I want to do? And so I applied to school, and I wound up only getting accepted to one school because I went way over my head, and I wasn't a scholarship winner. And I wound up going to the University of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Sound familiar? Right? Local.
My alma mater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So school was pretty easy for me, got to say. Didn't want to go home in the summers because Long Island summers were not very interesting. So I stayed in school every summer, and I graduated when I was 19.
Wow.
So here I am now. I'm 19. I'm sitting outside Bodine Hall, as you probably know, and thinking, wow, no school. I'm done. Now what?
You went to school for social sciences, right?
Social science and teaching.
And teaching. I have to ask, how did your life take the hard turn and you end up at an ad agency?
16, you go away to college. 19, you go on a gap year. You come home a year later, say, hi, Mom and Dad, I'm moving to San Diego. I said, yeah, right. I can't really tell you what my parents said. But absolutely got a hard stop on that. Did it stop me? For a little bit. So I moved to Manhattan. I lived in the city. I had a job as a counselor. In fact, my very first job was in an abortion clinic. And talk about firsts. Like, that was tough. That was so tough for me because I was counseling young girls, some in their early teens, and listening to their stories of how they were abused by any number. I won't go into all the familial people who were mentioned in the abuse stories. Oh, broke my heart. But at least they were taking care of it. We also helped patients from around the world, really, because it was one of the first. New York was the first place that abortion was legal in the country at that time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I helped French-speaking patients from Canada, German-speaking patients. And it was so intense there that they actually, I won't mention the name of the place because they're probably going to get in trouble if they're even around anymore. But they actually trained some of us to go into the operating rooms because we spoke the language and be able to speak with the patients. And we actually became like LPNs, like practical nurses, which freaked me out. The first time I did it, I passed out. Anyway, I wasn't much good. But so I lived in Manhattan. That job was intense, and it had a really, really big effect on my life. I said, I need to go. So I happened to stop in Chicago visiting a friend on my way to San Diego, because remember, that was my mission. And I loved Chicago because I wasn't there in the winter or the summer. It was the fall. It was beautiful. Culturally, architecture, people, Midwest, beach in the middle of the city. It was great. So I went for a job interview, got hired on the first interview in an ad agency. And our main client was Dale Carnegie and Associates, how to win friends and influence people. And I learned how to do traffic in ads. So, how to get the mechanicals to the right publishers. And I worked with the clients and the publishers. And it was really an interesting experience. But then the weather changed. And I remember my mission is to get to live in this Mediterranean-like climate. Loved Chicago, but after a year, I said, you know what? I'm packing it up. I'm moving to San Diego. And I did. Didn't know anybody. I had never been there before, but that's kind of been...
You were going to get back to that climate no matter what.
I was determined, just like my father was determined to get out of Vienna and get to the United States. I had the determination to get out of New York, out of Chicago, and get to where I really wanted to live.
Well, it sounds like you did a whole lot of dreaming, a lot of California dreaming, pun intended. So how do we go from you get to San Diego and you did a little bit of California dreaming in your head, but take us through how you did a little bit of commercial California dreaming as well.
Wait till you hear this. Okay. So I get there, I'm introduced to some people I lived in a place called Oakwood that, are furnished apartments, and I met people there, and one owned an employment agency. He said, just come in and go through all my open tickets and do whatever you want. So I did. I found a job kind of doing lead gen for an ad agency, and I did a very good job at it. And then one of the companies actually asked me to come and work for them, and I did. I didn't love anything I was doing, but I was paying my bills. And I think my rent at the time was something like $800 a month. And
Which is a lot back then, in that area, yeah.
It was, but I had to live I made it to San Diego. I'm living where I can see water. I'm living where I can see palm trees. And it was wonderful. And one thing led to another. I met people, and I ultimately got a job in a manufacturing company that was in the gift and decorative accessory industry. And at first I was telephone sales. I was upselling every order that came in. I did data entry, and I was the data processing manager. And then I became the sales manager, and I was traveling all over the country doing trade shows. And it was fun. I really, really had a good time. But I didn't have any free time. So I stopped doing that, and I became a manufacturer's rep. So instead of being national, I would be able to go and call on local stores, and I had a whole line of products that I represented. And lo and behold, one day, one of the people I was selling to said, you know what, I want to open a store with you. Would you be willing to do that? Here again, going back to my entrepreneurial past, my parents having retail stores, I said, okay, let's see what we can do. And he had a successful business running a number of stores. So our very first store together, I didn't leave the repping yet. I wanted to see how it goes. Our very first store together was in a very high traffic tourist destination center in San Diego on the water. And the name of the store was California Dreamin', to what you just said.
Did you name that, or is that your...
We did. We did.
Names are kind of your thing. We're going to learn more about that later. But I might have heard from a little birdie that names is something that you're pretty good at. So.
All right. Well, it's something that it's a good hobby, and I really enjoy it. So California Dreamin' first, then we had Poster Express, Trends, Fashion Accessories, the Family Tree, where we did heritage research and family crests and things like that. It was very eclectic. And as a result of our success at Seaport Village, we were also tasked with coming up with new concepts for stores. And we did one in partnership with the city of San Diego, which was the San Diego City Store. And we sold old street signs, parking meters, traffic signals, hydrants, stuff from the fire department, old boots. We had all kinds of logo products and T-shirts. And we had one person who worked for us who was actually a dumpster diver. And we would go and pull stuff out of the dumpsters and we clean it up and put it in these stores that we would get, like pop-ups, although no one knew of pop-ups then, but pop-ups in big fashion retail malls. And it got so much attention. It was probably the first business I did that really caught the local and national news.
I love it. I mean, everybody wants to take a little bit of California with them. I remember at some point somebody brought me back like a jar of California Sunshine one time when I was a kid. And it's, kitschy as it sounds, but it's like there's just something special about that place out there. So, but if my notes serve me correctly, there was a conversation that was taking place in one of the stores.
That's right.
The conversation took an interesting turn and might have got into some areas of technology, which kind of piqued your interest. So take us through that moment. You're in the store, you're doing these things, you're launching all these new concepts, and then you get the bug. And the bug I'm referring to, folks, if you haven't picked it up yet, is the technology bug, which I think is going to be a big catalyst for the rest of Beverly's life.
So I'm in the store and, I have notoriety now for having very successful stores. Did a lot of pop-ups for America's Cup and during the Super Bowl and a number of other big events. So one of the owners of the mall came into the store one day, excuse me, and said, "Hi, Beverly, do you have email?" And of course, being the entrepreneur that I am, I said, "No, but I can get it." "Why do you ask?" And he had just returned from a trip and he was on a plane and he was sitting next to this man who told him the story of kind of not necessarily email per se, but of what he and a team were developing. And he was so intrigued about it that he continued the conversation with the man and also when he got home, and they conceived of this idea of starting a technology company that would be a secure payment system for purchasing products online. Now remember, this is in the early to mid-90s. And the fear is that if you would put your credit card on the internet to buy something, the merchant then would have just a treasure trove and a vast number, all the credit cards that consumers were using to buy products. How can you protect that from someone coming in and hacking into the merchant's server and stealing all the credit cards? It's a problem. So they came up with a solution that was later coined as First Virtual Holdings Incorporated, a virtual PIN. So instead of putting your credit card on a merchant site, you would just provide a PIN. And that PIN was connected to your credit card, but it got validated. Every transaction would get validated by you in email. And there was a way to connect those two in a secure environment. It was actually a phone call, and our servers were in the secure server rooms at EDS, if you remember that company. It was quite complex, but it worked. And the challenge, so they asked me to join 3 very seasoned developers at the time, the owner of the shopping center, and I, the 5 of us, embarked on this journey to launch First Virtual Payment System, First Virtual Holdings Incorporated. And, some of the first meetings just took place in my kitchen. We were a distributed company. Remember, this is, 20 plus years ago, very forward thinking. And I remember I was still somewhat involved in the gift industry, and I was showing some of the major department stores the internet for the first time and showing them how you could run an advertisement on a website that was JavaScript that you could actually have a transaction in the banner ad. And they thought, what is she talking about? But nonetheless, that company not only thrived for the payment system, but we also created micro merchants. So if you have recipes that you are part of your family that you want to sell, or images, or, songs, or whatever it might be, whatever you wanted to sell as a merchant, you could become a merchant online using our payment system.
So really like OG creator economy.
Totally. And the exciting part about that was, as we grew and developed, we had investors, the likes of First Data, First USA, obviously now part of Chase, right? Chase First USA?
I think so.
Not sure.
GE Capital, some really big names who were our backers. And we went public. So my very first tech company, my roles varied as the company grew. Because we have,
What were the roles?
What did you start at?
So initially I was just as being the entrepreneur that I am, I could do anything other than code. So I started with just like finding sites for the company, building out the office space, building out the team, hiring people. Marketing really was my niche. Marketing, sales, PR, interfacing with all the agencies, and kind of being like the go-to person in the organization for anything other than all things technical. And I loved it, and I thrived. And, I love the feeling of growth and excitement of developing something and being an entrepreneur. But when it gets too corporate and it starts slowing down, I'm not that interested. I feel like I need the momentum. I need I need that to keep me excited.
It happens a lot. That happens to me. I think it happens to Pete. I think it happens to people. What do you think is the driving force behind that? Is it something mental in us? Is it like some type of ADD? Like, why do you think we all get sort of, not all of us, but the group of us that do have it happen to us, that we disconnect from the idea of a slower pace and a more corporate and stable environment?
It's a great, great question. And I have to say, I ask myself that many times in life, because, you could revel in your accomplishments and, take it at a different pace, and, it's okay. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what you do when you totally retire. I don't know. But for me, if you are in the process of developing something and you see its potential and you keep thinking about how to make it better, we're always trying to do more and to make it better. Is it our A-type personalities? Is it our vision that we can see, begin with the end in mind, so we can see what is possible? And if it's taking too long to get there, we want to speed it up because we see it. And I think that's probably true for both of you. You're visionaries. You see where you want to go. And, how much time do we have?
Yeah. Some people would say it's impatience. I think it's really just manifested in terms of crossing the chasm, right? We've all read that book in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's a vibe and a velocity and a veracity, I think, of that sort of the art of the start, if you will, right? And I think it's like some of the more academics, I think, would break this down as, we have pioneers, we have settlers, we have citizens, and obviously citizens and shepherds and that sort of thing. And clearly you're a pioneer, right? So what I'm hearing from you, and I think what I've seen from you and we've experienced together, is like that shift from pioneer to settler, and sort of once you've got something set up and kind of keeping it running, that's less exciting, right? What's for you, you got this thing in your mind's eye as an entrepreneur, you want to manifest it, and then you want to get people in place to make that happen, and you want to get out on the next thing that's in your mind's eye, because the mind's eye never stops, right? So that's sort of how I would explain it. I don't know. I'd love to hear you kind of try that on for size. Like, does that track with you? Does that not track with you?
100%. It really does. I think that, if you know where you want to go and you get there, you've arrived. do you want to just stay or do you want to get to the next level? And, what are you both athletes?
I'm a mental athlete. I don't know. He's amazing with his hands and body. You play all kinds of sports, but
yeah, I wouldn't say it. I'm athletic. Yeah.
So do you thrive on the adrenaline you get from being in sports or winning a game or completing it? Right?
Yeah.
So
and I don't play them anymore. So now I'm like sitting in my daughter's volleyball game going, I need to go out there.
Well, you're like Ted Lasso now, right? You're the Ted Lasso now. You're not on the field anymore.
I know. I wish I was though. I do thrive for that.
But that adrenaline or the dopamine or that adrenaline rush you get when you do some high aerobic or high cardio, it's very similar I think, in business. When you have a success, you get that excitement to do the next thing. I was totally, I don't want to use the word addicted, but I would say that to step aerobics when it first came out. Reebok, by the way, is the one who launched the step. I couldn't get enough of step aerobics because it gave me such an adrenaline rush. Mm-hmm. And for the rest of the day, watch out, world, here she comes. Mm-hmm. I even taught step in my later years, but I think that's what it is. You get that excitement when you see the success of the work that you've done in a business, and you just want to keep going.
I love that. David, I want you to unpack the epilogue, the wire hit moment, those things for us. To don't let Beverly escape without taking us through those moments.
So you're in this business. How long from start to IPO?
At First Virtual was about 2 years.
That's it?
Yeah.
Wow.
The rules were very, very different in those days to go public. In fact, I don't know if you remember Bear Stearns, but they were on the left side of our book.
Mm.
Of course, for those who don't know, they're no longer around. But the rules were very, very different. I would say if we hadn't gone public, we probably could have gone out of business.
So a little fast and loose at the time.
Yeah. It was, we had good customers. We had good investors, but it was hard. I mean, it was hard. I remember we made our own e-commerce sites just to show people how to use our payment system.
So now you decide to IPO with your team. What was that like because that's the exit, right? That's the time where investors get their money back, or they should. There's some type of a payday. There's a sense of relief. The public markets are taking over the company essentially. In essence, walk us through that, because every entrepreneur that we talk to, we always try to get into that moment, into what we call when the wire hits. How did that feel as a young woman who sort of tripped into San Diego and then landed into this technology company?
It was a very, very proud moment. When my parents could see the article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the company that I was part of, that's a proud moment.
What did your dad say?
Oh,
his buddy did it.
He was over the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was so proud. So proud. And, of course he had to take a little credit for the fact that, he paved the way for me or showed me the way. But honestly, it wasn't as big of a payday as it might be today. It was millions of dollars, but not what you would think. And we were very proud as a company because that's a milestone achievement. However, it didn't necessarily make things easier. It meant that we had more people to answer to. And so the good news is that we had cash to bring on new talent, and we could bring on new experienced talent from a number of highbrow corps. But remember, we're in a new space. So who really had the experience, even though they had titles that came from, big corps, they didn't know. And then they started going in a different direction than what I had envisioned for the company. Mm-hmm. I was demoted in a way because I didn't have that big corp experience. So they're bringing in like CMOs from, that they worked with. And it just wasn't going the way I envisioned and I felt good about. And I decided that it was time for me to pursue other things. I still was in tech. And one thing I did learn from that experience is I traveled around the world, literally, speaking at conferences about technology, about e-commerce, about payment systems online. I spoke in Monaco to the National Motion Pictures Association. I spoke in Brussels at the SWIFT conference,
of course, the banking system, yeah.
And then went to a dinner at the headquarters. I mean, the types of invitations I would get are just, were off the charts. And I was pretty much the only woman on every panel. And it was, I consider myself a trailblazer in that regard. And it was cool. It was, when I look back on it, it was an honor and an opportunity. And not only was it an opportunity for me, but it was a way for me to really be a role model for other women to say, there aren't a lot of women in tech, but there's a role. And it doesn't have to be a marketing role. I remember hiring people for our company who were developers, software developers. And they did really well. We're developing websites. More women, and I was always conscious of that. And I still am today. And how do we create more opportunities for women in technology?
I want to go deeper on that. I want to be an ally here to the best of my ability. Like at that time, and somebody would say to this day, it's a man's world, right? Is what some people would say, the wrong people. But I think to that end, the question I have for you is, for those that are listening to this now or in the future that didn't have the opportunity to go off in the world and live on a kibbutz and be able to have that worldly confidence in self, what can you say, sort of speak to the women entrepreneurs now or that are starting businesses or building businesses, but being met with the resistance of that sort of man's world, glass ceiling, the words that people use against us? How do they channel their inner Beverly? Because I think that's going to be something that a lot of people can get a ton of value from.
My best advice today is find a mentor. Find a woman you can connect with and relate to, who can help you make your plan and to help you navigate in the industry in which you want to be connected.
How do they find that mentor? Like in today's world, let's say there's a young woman of color who's coming up and not connected, not in San Diego or not in an industrious place like New York. How do they go out and seek out that mentor and connect with that mentor? What's some practical advice you can give for that?
Social media, especially LinkedIn, search for the people who you admire, read their posts, understand who they are, look at their own CV, obviously do your Google searches, and write a really well-intended, succinct DM and try to connect first and then write a DM or see who they are connected to, who you might know.
Right.
But reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out, because I think that women who have experienced success want to help and should want to help those who are coming up.
I love that. Yeah. So do your research, keep it succinct and short, because people like Beverly are really busy, and shoot your shot. That's the way you're going to do it, is seek out the people and lean into what you believe is someone that's emulating the role that you want to see happen. And that's the advice we take. So I love that advice. Thank you for sharing it.
Be brave.
Yeah, be brave.
Be brave.
Too many women don't believe that they are ready for the shot, or that they deserve a shot, and they sit there and wait. I talk to so many women all the time, and the answer is just to be brave and to ask the questions and try. And they won't, because for some reason, they just have this insecurity. And it's always a female thing. Guys never have that problem. Most guys never have that problem. They just, even when they're completely incompetent, undeserving of it, they still shoot shots.
Well, that's funny that you say that, but I will tell everyone, whether you're male or female, but especially the women, learn how to tell your story.
Your story is your strategy.
Yep.
So
Learn how to tell your story.
So let's close the story on the company. What happened? So you left. So what I'm seeing in your story, by the way, and throughout this conversation, is that you really know who you are. The whole time you have self-awareness. You through school, through going to Israel, the bravery and the sense of security that you had in yourself and confidence you had in yourself to go to Israel by yourself, to do those things, to come back, to go cross country, start new companies, work with people, jump ship, start new things, incredible confidence, incredible self-awareness. Now all of a sudden you have this new self-awareness, this corporate life, this slow pace, this difference in vision is not for me. You leave. What happened to the company when you left?
The company thrived for a period of time and ultimately sold.
Okay.
And I'm sure you're all very familiar with PayPal, but PayPal, or eBay at the time, bought our patents.
Oh.
And that is ultimately what became PayPal. And so every time I hear stories about the PayPal mafia or all the things that, the people who started the company have achieved, sometimes I'm envious, but a lot of times I'm kind of pissed because I don't actually believe in some of what's going on, and PayPal is what enabled them to be where they are today.
Well,
that's another story.
Well, everybody talks about Darwin's theory of evolution, when we all know it wasn't Darwin that came up with it, right? So it's sometimes, like you just said, your story is your strategy. So it's getting back to that first gig in advertising really matters, right? So now you go off, and this is where I think that your knowledge of marketplaces, your knowledge of merchants, your knowledge of retail at that time was really an innovative catalyst in that space, right? There's not a lot of people that had the knowledge, the know-how, and the application experience that you did. You now go on to start marketplace consulting. So what was marketplace consulting, and how did that then start to lead into the journey that becomes other things?
So marketplace consulting was a way for me to approach other companies and be able to have consulting gigs. And when I left First Virtual, I actually had a consulting gig waiting for me in San Francisco because I decided at Woman in Tech, I was changing my personal life situation. I'm going where tech is and where tech is growing. And that was
Leading the Mediterranean?
Sort of, kind of. Now the Mediterranean was not as important as my future and my professional future. And I didn't have fear of the unknown because I had so much experience in business already. So I decided to move to San Francisco, follow tech, and I had a consulting gig already waiting for me there, hence marketplace consulting being so important. And I arrived, I lived in the city, had a great place on Russian Hill. My office was in Burlingame, good company, did some really great marketing at that company. And it's early stage. But I was working ridiculous hours. Hello, welcome to, startup land. And I'm not afraid to work hard, but I also want to have a life. And especially since I had moved and didn't, have a chance to explore the city yet. So I kept the job or the consulting gig because I needed to be connected to the community, and it gave me a great way to meet people. So I'm referring back to your previous guest on the show, Chris Redlitz. So through a number of events and things, I was still in the advertising industry, but, tech advertising. And went to a couple of events and met some great people. And one of those people happened to be the co-founder of a company called Ad Auction.
Awesome. And that's where we met Chris Redlitz, who was a former guest of ours on the show.
That's exactly right.
Fantastic.
And Chris and I met at an event. We also, I think he might have told the story about how we met in Manhattan at a dinner, and all he wanted to do was get out of the dinner, and I was there being accommodating to the co-founder who was kind of following me around at various trade shows and was just being polite. But his co-founder hired me as a consultant, hence Marketplace Consulting once again, to come in and help them grow their business. And I think there was something like 9 employees. So he hires me. Chris didn't even know that he hired me, and he was kind of not happy about it. Dave, if you want to go out with her, you don't have to hire her. And, I show up one day in the office and just looking around like, what are you doing here? That's the beginning. And, of course, the end is where we are today. But I was able to really help them also grow their business from startup and in a number of categories.
What was Ad Auction, just for the guests that might not be aware of it at the time?
It was a very forward-thinking technology solution for publishers, online publishers who had remnant ad space to sell. Google search words, any website, they thrived. That was their business, selling advertising. And so obviously, just like in even TV and radio, not everything sells. So what do you do with the remnant inventory? Well, they provided auction capabilities for sites to be able to sell their remnant inventory on an auction basis so that they could generate revenue and not have unsold space. And it went from, barges and billboards outdoor, and it covered a whole span of advertising. But it was that technology of the auction that really was the sticking point. And that company also started as a startup and then had hundreds of employees when I ultimately left Ad Auction. But it was a great ride, a great experience, and very well valued in the community.
What I think I keep seeing, I want to just see if I'm getting this right. Maybe you can help me see the error in my ways or correct me. Is it sounds like a lot of the things that you've been a part of, you've shaped the vision, you've shaped the business development, revenue operations, business operations, like you said, wore every hat except for the coder hat, essentially, and got systems set up, got people set up in a way that helped catalyze the scale of the organization. And once it got to a place where those things were set up, where those interesting, fun puzzle pieces were sort of solved, which you were a big part of on the operations and strategy side, then I wouldn't say you got bored, but just to use some of your language, it's like, okay, now the company is scaling, it's moving on itself, you're sort of off to find the next puzzle piece. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that is fair. It's, maybe back to the adrenaline. Accomplished, things are going well, or not. I mean, in some companies,
sure.
After that, or not. But it's about holding my interest and keeping me stimulated enough to have a purpose.
Well, it's almost like you're kicking chaos into clarity. And speaking of kicking,
I like that.
Put that on your resume, even though you don't need one at this point, right? It's just like, here's my card. It just says Beverly. You're done. That's all you need. So you move on from Ad Auction. Obviously, got to a place where the company is now scaling operationally. You're a little bit bored. It's time to move on to the next big puzzle piece. So what's KickLabs? Like I may or may not have heard of that. The audience may or not have heard of that, but I know a lot of the people that were a part of that, the audience has certainly heard of. So take us through what was KickLabs? What the hell did you do with them? And ultimately, what was that journey like for you?
So after Ad Auction, Chris and I started a number of different companies in B2B, B2C, P2P, a number of different, business models. And ultimately, we decided to start a technology accelerator in San Francisco, where we gave entrepreneurs free space inside this fabulous building that we had on 2nd and Brannan. And we helped them to grow their businesses, to figure out their business strategy, their marketing plans, introduce them to big corps for brand association and funding and pitching. And it was taking all of what Chris and I had accomplished over all the years in business and using that to mentor men and women who were starting their companies. And it was fascinating. We had 14 companies in our cohort. We had demo days more for big brands coming in to see the entrepreneurs. Willie Brown gave us named a day, KickLabs Day in San Francisco, and we put on a lot of events, and that was also one of the things I did well and enjoyed doing, is putting on events. And so we became known. We also had this big blue slide, and we were known for that and our dim sum, in addition to all the great speakers that we had.
You also had a couple of companies that might have had some of those bright, memorable colors that came through. So you are a very humble, you have a ton of humility. I think we can all learn from that as leaders, but I have to push you to say, just could you share with the audience just a couple of the small companies that they might have heard of that kind of found their way from sitting at desks at KickLabs to doing different things? Just, I have to push.
Well, I'd say probably the most notable was a company called Context Logic. And today the name of their company is Wish. And Wish is a huge online shopping experience for merchants to be able to sell direct to consumer on their platform. Multinational, a lot of Asian companies being able to sell direct to consumer, and that would be the most notable of all. There are many others that have been acquired and name change and so forth, but that's the big one.
Right on. And wasn't some of the folks at early Uber days kind of hanging out there, just bumping elbows and stuff at some of the dim sum events?
So yes, and we when we moved from that building I mentioned, we moved into another co-working space, and we had our own kind of area upstairs in the co-working space, and that's where we met a lot of companies like Uber and others who were also in that space, but they weren't in KickLabs.
Fantastic. No, I appreciate it. It sounds like you were in the heart of it all.
We were.
So you have, in Ad Auction and in KickLabs, you fell into operations roles. So in our world, we talk about quite often the V and I combo, the visionary and the integrator. And there's a book about it called Rocket Fuel. And what was the other book that came before? Traction. That talks about that. We really take into that concept where visionaries like us always need integrators. And without the integrator, it's really difficult to get that velocity. You seem to have fallen into the role of that integrator. Now, integrator in a big way, because you're also visionary when it comes to branding and marketing and all of those things, but you're okay and comfortable in the role of the integrator. Is that safe to say?
Very safe to say. And, my chief visionary is Chris Redlitz. And he and I share a lot of, common vision. Mm-hmm. So we have a chance. It's incredible to be able to find a life partner with whom you don't always agree, but you have the same vision, and to have someone like me to be able to implement with assistance from time to time, because sometimes it's a heavy lift, but I love getting it done. Mm-hmm. And the feeling of accomplishment, maybe this goes all the way back to the original adrenaline we were talking about, but the feeling of accomplishment when someone is a visionary and has an idea, and then having it be built out and realized, because so many ideas just go by the wayside. Nothing ever happens.
Well, ideas are nothing without execution.
That's right.
Yeah. I find it, for me as a visionary, even any execution of the ideas, even just being right about a strategy, being right about the future, being right about a relationship, are these moments of like elation and just proudness that you get where you're just like, I knew this, I put these things in motion. It's almost like a game where you're like, if I put these blocks together, this will happen. And when it does, you just have that like little moment. It doesn't even have to be the whole execution of the idea. It's just it's the journey. I always say it's all about the journey. This whole entire show is about the journey. And you've been lucky to find that partner at Ad Auction, and then now you guys have been on the journey. So I want to move the journey forward.
Before we move the journey forward,
the-
can I just unpack a few things with you?
I know I was gonna like it was gonna.
It was a
moving the
good
journey
segue. All
to the last mile.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna do it.
No, you could do it.
No, you ruined it.
No, I don't.
Ruined it.
Now, we will resolve this. Don't worry.
See, this is integrated.
So operationally, KickLabs was an early accelerator. There's
Yes.
been a lot of accelerators, venture studios. There's countless stuff published on there. Usually by academics who didn't live it, but published. What I'd love to get a sense from you on is you're definitely a very much a visionary thinker, and we've had the pleasure of talking sort of off camera, before today. I want to understand in your mind, if you were to start KickLabs today in 2023, in the challenging venture climate we're in today, where safe notes have essentially become bullshit in many ways, and venture capital is drying up. If you were to start KickLabs today as an accelerator, what would that look or feel like for you? I just want to kind of get a taste of your mind to understand, with everything you know, what would that look like?
That's a good question. Good reason.
Very good question. I would say, my just first top of mind answer would be, I would be very specific about the business focus and make sure that I would start it with one vertical in mind, not multiple business types as we had in KickLabs. Whether it be health, whether it be climate, whether it be social justice, I would definitely focus on one specific vertical and not be so linear.
So let's assume that someone was to pick one of those verticals that made a lot of sense. What do you think are the ingredients or the playbooks that some folks that might be thinking about this or are working on this now, whether it's an accelerator, a venture studio, or some hybrid model, what do you think the recipe would be for success beyond the single vertical focus?
I would say it's the grit of the entrepreneurs that you accept in the accelerator.
How do you screen for that? You've hired tons of people.
You just feel it in your gut. You listen to their stories. You see what they have accomplished. But it's not necessarily what they have accomplished. It's what they set out, what their vision is for the future and how they plan to get there. But I have to say, I think you probably feel this too when, you tell me stories about meeting someone by chance. You could feel who they are, right?
How do you further that intuition, right? So a lot of people try to take, I talk about this a lot, you call the wit and grit or whatever the language terms you've used are, but how do you develop that intuition, right? Because it's like people are going to watch the show and they might get a little bit mad at you, right, in the comments and say, well, that's great, but how do you develop that intuition? Beverly, like, how can I practice that when I know that feeling when I'm having that interview? So for the accelerator MD or CEO that's running that accelerator, building it, we got a single vertical now. So one piece of the recipe. We're going to put this in the show notes for you folks. Don't worry. We got grit and being able to trust your instincts and build those instincts. What are the other pieces of the puzzle?
Track record. I'd look and see what the entrepreneur has accomplished and, lay out the plan, what impact it has on society.
Okay.
What is your goal? Okay. What's the ultimate goal? It's not about strictly financial reward, but I think everybody has to have a desire to do good.
I love it. I like to think of my life a lot in terms of traffic lights. My team is probably sick of me hearing me say this, but so you've given us the green lights, grit, single vertical focus. What are the red lights? Things that you wouldn't do, having done this so many times? What are the red lights for an accelerator in the 2023 climate?
I think the red light for me would be selecting someone who was solely focused on themselves and not interested in being part of the community.
Over.
Because oftentimes especially if you're a single vertical, there are a lot of ways that companies can work together, better together and bigger and more.
Faster.
Yeah. So
community and connection over ego. Love that. Any other red lights?
probably track record.
Okay.
How do you deal with track record? So we both of us invested in a young man that has a company that we think is going to revolutionize a very important part of the elder care community, right? So
People with challenges with activities of living, yeah.
So it's novel in a sense, but but that's what makes it beautiful. He's 26 years old. I'm going through his new deck. He's raising a new round of funding, so I'd say it's his Series A, right?
Yeah, it's
his Series A, and I'm looking through his deck, and I get to his team slide, and he's got in his team slide all this extra fluff about him, and it occurs to me immediately that he's insecure about his age, he's insecure about his picture because he looks really young, and he's insecure about his track record.
We got to give him some facial fare. I'll just paint it on.
I gave him some interesting tips. Yeah.
AI.
It's the AI. I also just said increase the size so there's less neck. The neck makes you look young.
What was he wearing?
I don't remember, but it would. As soon as I identified it to him, he immediately buckled and said, "You're right." He goes, "It's something that does make me nervous, and I do feel like I look young and sound like young, so I put all this extra fluff in here into the deck so that they know they can see who I am." And I told him, I said, "You got to delete that." I said that immediately shines a light on your
naivete.
Yeah, your naivete, your age, all of these things. But how would that? What advice would you give him? Because you said track record. You said it on the green light side. You said it on the red light side. Here's a kid. He's 26 years old. In my mind, I can only look at the track record that got him from point A, pre-seed, to get to that A round, and the fact that he's deserving of it and the team that he's put forward. Is that the best way to look at it? Do you see another pathway to track record for a young man like that, or a female?
So what about personal accomplishments? Do you care about personal accomplishments if you're going from seed to Series A? Do you care about the volunteerism that they have done in their lifetime? Do you care about, I have to say, when I was hiring for First Virtual or even all of my retail stores, I always looked at what teams they were on. Are they a team player? A lot of times I looked at, wow, they worked at Nordstrom. Do you know what kind of training they got in customer service there? And I'm not saying your entrepreneur should be including that per se, but character.
I was just gonna say, I literally wrote character on my notes.
See,
it's like,
great minds.
So track record, you don't just mean, they've done a big thing before. You're saying you're getting into the fiber of the human.
Exactly.
So I like that. Yeah, that's a good.
Well, that's why I ask it, because a lot of venture people just look at track record as, did you exit a company? Were you an executive at a company?
Can I trust you?
Yeah.
Show me that I can trust you to be true to your word and to be able to, building a business doesn't mean that you have to have done it before. It means that, you have what it takes and you have good people who are on your side, mentoring and helping you to succeed.
No, can I
segue? I was just going to say, I'm literally going to pause us because I don't want to fuck up your great segue. So that was a great pause on her side where you could jump in on the segue and it'll be a nice smooth thing. I don't want to take that shine away. So segue away, my friend. Segue away.
Segway. Wow.
Okay.
Did you ever ride on a Segway?
So
uncomfortably. Yes.
So
I know.
So it's funny. So it's funny that we've arrived at track record, which is going to play a really big role in the next part of your life and your journey. That part of the life is what we call the last mile. It's figuratively and literally, because the company that you have started with Chris is called The Last Mile. And this seems to be your life's work now, right? So, which I heard from Chris, I feel it from you. I am now getting into it myself through some work on the reentry side and to help on the recidivism side. But it is the hardest part, is that you're looking at people's track records and trust. And you have to build this up from the ground now. So walk us through the last mile, why it started, where you are today, what it is, where you are today.
Wow. How much time do we have? So, The Last Mile started in 2010, concurrent with KickLabs, the technology accelerator we had in San Francisco. And Chris went inside San Quentin one day to speak to a group of men about business and entrepreneurship. We had never been inside San Quentin, even though we passed it every day to and from our commute to San Francisco. He went inside. It was in the evening. I was home, waiting for him to come back, have dinner. 30 minutes, an hour. Finally, 3 hours later, he walks in the door. And first thing he said, because he's so aglow, and he had another one of what I call Chris's crazy ideas, the visionary with the big ideas. He said, we're going to start KickLabs inside San Quentin. I won't tell you exactly what I said, but...
I'm guessing you said, you're fucking crazy.
You're right. You're right. Why would I go into prison, A, and B, I don't have any spare time right now. Why would I spend my time with people who have wronged society? Making a judgment, which I shouldn't have, but I did. He said, please, again, I'm the facilitator. I'm making everything happen. Please, just one time, come in with me and I could tell he was so excited. And he was so, he had that look in his eyes that he just gets when he's like super focused. He said, just come in one time. I want you to experience what I just did. So I agreed. And a few weeks later, we went inside San Quentin. We went to an event. And I have to say the rest is history. I couldn't believe it. I was able to meet some of the men that he met that first night. We actually met in a broom closet behind the stage in the chapel. It's very eerie. And I listened to their stories, hence telling your story. And I said, okay, I'm in. Let's do this. And for 2 years, twice a week, Chris and I went into San Quentin. We taught a class on entrepreneurship. We created the curriculum. And we had a demo day, the first demo day ever held inside a correctional facility. We had 350 people, including people from the business community, venture capitalists, big news media, CNN and USA Today, LA Times, Wall Street Journal.
Why is this a problem? And why is this an opportunity? Because I was blown away when you and Chris shared with me a little bit about some of the statistics. I'm a data person, and, a lot of the privilege that I had growing up, I just didn't understand the world in that way. So just take us through the problem, the opportunity there. Please just paint that picture for the audience, because it's prolific when you hear what Beverly and Chris say about this with The Last Mile.
So initially, remember, this is just the entrepreneurship program that we started, and we had 4 cohorts. But initially, what really hooked me, honestly, is when I came back from that first night. I did some research, and that the United States has 5% of the world population and 25% of the world's incarcerated population.
Wow.
And at the time...
One fourth, 25%.
Of the world's incarcerated population. We have over 2 million people today, that who are in the system. Wow. But that's only people in the system. It doesn't account for how many people have returned to society from incarcerated settings who still have the stigma and still have the issues of leading a successful life because they are justice impacted. It's a real problem. And so when I did the research and I saw, I learned some of the numbers, the one that really got, two things that got to me. Number one was the rate of recidivism, which at the time was over 60%, meaning that within 3 years of return to society, those who had been incarcerated are going back to prison.
So it's not working. Something's not working.
Exactly. They don't have the tools to be successful and stay out. And the other thing that really hit me, in California, we spent more. I think at the time it was only $67,000. Now I believe it's 6 figures a year to keep someone incarcerated. So that means that, honestly, today it costs more to keep someone incarcerated than to send them to Stanford or, for a degree. And then compounded, if all this wasn't enough, learning about the generational cycle of incarceration just really hit hard. So imagine this is what Chris and I set out to do, if we could reduce recidivism, and at the time we said, maybe we could reduce recidivism by just 5%. Take those tax dollars that we're spending on incarceration and put them into education for children in underserved communities so they don't follow their families, or they have the tools to be successful, and they don't have to take to the street, and they can actually avoid going down that generational cycle of incarceration. I said, if I can do that, I am so in. I'll do whatever it takes. And when I told my father about The Last Mile, he really supported it, and he welled up, and he said, I had a second chance in life, and you're going to be doing that for these people in our country. I'm really, really proud of that.
Love that.
Yeah. And I actually say it's a fair chance, because I believe that a lot of the people who are in our programs never had a first chance.
It's true. It's true. I think I forget the statistic, but it's extremely high. Children without fathers, the likelihood of going into prison, and is like, I forget the numbers. We'll have to pull them up in the video, but it's extremely high.
It's very high.
Yeah,
it is.
So, and then getting them, so when they re-enter, if you can reunite them with their family, if you can prepare them for their family, if you can prepare them for life, there's a chance that you can change and break that generational curse. Yeah.
It's so important. But imagine, so we started with entrepreneurship, and then our students were coming home. They were getting jobs in our business community through our friends, and they were thriving, and they're not going back to prison. So we thought, how can we scale this? Because remember, we're entrepreneurs, and we have this business sense. How do we scale this? This is great. So we looked for opportunities. Where are the opportunities for employment? Because we believe having a job is the key to successful reentry and breaking the cycle of incarceration. And at the time, it was predicted that there would be a shortage of 1 million software engineers by 2020. Said, great, we're going to start teaching coding inside San Quentin. And people said, what? You're crazy. A, there's no connectivity. And B, no one has ever done anything like this before. Long story short, we went to Sacramento, we got permission, we bootstrapped it, we got in partnership with Cal PIA, actually, and they were helping us to set this up, and they support the program to this day. And we started our first coding program. It got a lot of attention, to the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan coming in, Stuart Butterfield, CEO of Slack at the time, coming in, Valerie Jarrett, Arnie Duncan, and the list goes on and on of people like, what are you doing here? We're going to lead by example. So our first cohort completed, and we've had many others, but one day we got a call from Governor Holcomb in Indiana. He said, I want the last mile in our facilities in Indiana. It was the first out-of-state program that we established, and now we have 4 facilities there, and today we are in 8 states. But I will say that after we launched in San Quentin, and I was pitching a variety of potential funders, my first pitch was to get the program in a women's facility, because women, it's so important to have women represented in tech. And it's so important today, if you think about DEI, we need to have more people working in companies that are a reflection of the consumers that they're creating the products for. It can't be a bunch of, I don't mean bunch, but you cannot have a homogenous group creating products for a diverse world. It's just not the right thing. So always advocating for women, and certainly women in tech. And so our first women's program started 2 years after the men's program, because we really had to do a proof of concept and see it all. So today we have a number of women not only studying inside, but also working for tech companies like Slack. Slack has quite a number of TLM grads who start out as junior or apprentices who are now senior software engineers. And there are many others, Checker, quite a few engineers there, and Zoom and Dropbox and Square and Cash App, and even the Indiana Department of Corrections, and many others who have employed our graduates. And we're very, very excited about that. And we've also started an audio and video production track, because we're always looking ahead. Where are the jobs? And so we're going to continue to diversify our curriculum. We have many more tracks that we're adding. And the one thing I will also say that I think is vitally important is that we are in the process of building out a youth curriculum in partnership with Alameda County, and this will be in the jails. Everything else are in the state prisons, but we're creating this program so that it's shorter term, because jail terms are shorter than what time one might have in a state prison. It's usually where someone's going waiting for sentencing. So in Alameda County, in California, the youth have been taken out of the adult Department of Corrections. They closed the youth facilities. We had 3 programs in youth facilities, but they've since closed. And now we're focusing on creating this pilot program with Alameda County, and it will kind of be a taster of all the programs that we have, a little bit of web development, a little bit of full stack, and audio and video production for the youth, because they're coming in with more tech skills than many of the adults who've been, out of society for decades.
Yeah, I know since we met, and I promoted the episode with Chris, I've seen my friend Diane, who was responsible for getting free phone calls in the prisons. She was interested in this. I mentioned the group that I'm working with. They're all interested in the last mile and meeting you guys. It's clear that there's just a systemic need for this at this point. It was a systemic problem and a need for people like yourself, organizations like the Last Mile to work on this problem, because it's a huge population of people that deserve a chance, deserve forgiveness. We can forgive everybody, presidents, mayors, anybody can get forgiveness, but people that are coming out of the prison system have very, very little to be successful.
Beverly, we applaud you for the work that you and Chris and TLM are doing. Where do folks go to learn about TLM, to support TLM? Please tell us where to go online, and we'll, of course, include all that in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much for that question. thelastmile.org. We also have a podcast and radio show on SiriusXM, The Last Mile Radio, and we have a tremendous number of guests who are part of the movement for social change, as well as people telling their own personal stories of, having been in solitary confinement for 9 years for having a book in their cell that didn't comply with what the, system thought that they should be reading. I mean, when you hear the stories, it is mind-boggling. But we are hopeful for change. We see change happening, and it's because of both of you and the awareness that you are creating for your audience and the people you're meeting. And, it's an effort that we have to all work together and lead by example. There are people who have been wrongfully convicted, and you hear about them frequently, who are exonerated.
Tuesday.
Wow.
Tuesday.
And I want to
Double homicide, and it turned out that it was a wrongful conviction. Yeah.
Painful. And how many years were they incarcerated?
I don't know the number, but I know it was substantial.
Decades.
And I also know the lawsuit that he just won, part of it.
Good.
And it millions of dollars, and it's just like crazy to me. And then to learn the story, and it's like, and there's a lot of them. I mean, I've heard of 30 something in this state alone.
I know we're past our time with Beverly today. I want to be respectful of her really busy schedule. So just thank you, everyone, for tuning into Forward Obsessed. Thank you, Beverly, for being on the show and all the great work that you and Chris and The Last Mile are doing. Please go on, check out the links in the show notes below, folks. And as always, stay Forward Obsessed.
Thank you for listening to Forward Obsessed. Please share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast app. If you have feedback or suggestions for our next guest, visit us at forwardobsessed.com. If you want to dive deeper into every interview, subscribe to our Substack at forwardobsessed.substack.com. Also, find us on Instagram or TikTok at forwardobsessed to see all the best moments from every episode. This episode was produced by Robert Roach from District Studios in New Haven, Connecticut. If you would like to learn more about the team that makes this show possible, visit digitalsurgeons.com.